My name's Tom Froggatt, and I'm on a mission to meet as many of the world's best CEOs as I can. I want to understand what makes them tick, what great leadership looks like from their perspective, and how they learn to be great at what they do. This started out as a solo quest, but quickly I realized I should share these conversations with the world. If you're a CEO right now who wants to be more effective in your work, or if you have aspirations to take the top job, then CEO Sessions is the right place to be. Come and join me as I unlock the secrets of the world's best CEOs. In this very first episode of CEO Sessions, I'm with Emma Banks of Ramarketing. We explore the realities of leading a company in today's world, from the challenges of hybrid work to staying true to yourself as a leader. Emma was kind enough to share her experience with us as a CEO, talk about the impacts of leadership programs she's taken part in, and the lessons she's learned while leading a private equity-backed business. Welcome to the very first episode of a brand new podcast called CEO Sessions. I decided to set up this podcast to learn about how other CEOs have developed, approached their roles, and the lessons they've learned along the way. I started it very selfishly, but I thought, other people might want to get that insight too, and so decided to share these conversations with everyone listening. And I'm really pleased that as our first guest, Emma Banks of Ramarketing has agreed to join us. Emma, I really appreciate you coming on and kicking us off.
Well, it's great to be here, Tom. And let's hope as your first guest that I do you proud.
I'm sure you will. I have no doubt whatsoever. So Emma, you and I talked a little bit about the concept of this podcast, and I shared a few thoughts with you about what we'd talk about, and the conversation is very open-ended. We'll take it wherever we sort of see fit. But it's really all about what the role of a CEO is, what great looks like, how people have learned to develop as CEOs. And I think, sort of as we touched on before we started recording, my motivation behind it was that there's just not a huge amount of resource out there to support CEOs in their development. And I think a lot of them probably do want to get better at their job. And they have a disproportionate impact on the performance of their companies and therefore the happiness of their teams and their customers. And, I think if we can help show people how others have approached the job, because there's not one way to do the chief exec role, I don't think, that'll be a good thing, and that'll hopefully provide some insight for people. So really excited to dive into it with you. I'm going to start with kind of an abstract question in some ways, I suppose. Obviously, the chief executive of a company leads the company, but that's going to mean very different things in every environment. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on what you actually see the role of the CEO as.
Okay. So you know what I did in preparation for this, and maybe this is hilarious actually that I'm admitting it, but I asked ChatGPT to tell me what it thought
Okay.
the role of a CEO was, because I think that you're quite right. It must be, there are probably some core principles of the role that are the same across all types and sizes of businesses, but I suspect that's where it ends, and then it becomes quite unique to the business that you're running. We are relatively small, sort of 75, 80 people, and we're private equity backed. So that probably creates a sort of context, I guess. But anyway, ChatGPT was quite helpful, and I didn't disagree with what it said, so I'll tell you.
Okay.
So strategic planning, which of course you'd expect that, leadership, decision making, communication, looking after operations, financially being responsible, culture, risk management, managing stakeholders. And the one thing that was missing, and because we're a smaller business, is the client relationships. So making sure that they are a big part of my role particularly. But then I thought, okay, but what does it actually mean? So what does that actually mean? Because I agree with all of that. That's exactly what a CEO should be doing in any business in varying degrees, depending on size and scale. But for me, I suppose it means setting the best example I can.
Okay.
Being present, and it's hard in our hybrid workforce. We've got a workforce that's all over the world. we have a headquarters in Newcastle, and that's where a bulk of people are, but
Yes.
we work remotely, we work in a hybrid way, so I have to find a way to be present in ways that isn't just physically being in an office. This idea of balancing direction and listening to the amazing people around me. And I am very fortunate that I have incredible people around me, not least the chair of our board, who has been an incredible coach and mentor for me through the period of what's probably been just over 2 years with North Edge,
Right.
but also the wider team, who all have skill and experience and things to offer. So it's having to get that balance right. I mentioned the clients already.
Yes.
Really, really important. I'm sure you know that as well. That client contact is absolutely essential, keeps you at the coalface and keeps you present and current, I suppose.
Mm.
Setting an example around the values.
Okay. Yeah.
We have four. One of them is be canny, because we're from the Northeast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that it's a really important role of a CEO to be an exemplar of those things. You're not the only one responsible for it, clearly, but it's
No.
important. And relationships that are wider and deeper than we probably think. So we're very clear that in our business, because we're relatively small, we don't have an ivory tower. We are
Yes.
not C-levels sitting in a huge boardroom. I always think back to, have you seen the film Barbie? Have you seen
Yes,
it?
I've seen bits
So
of it. Yeah.
near the beginning, there's a big boardroom scene with Will Ferrell at the end.
Yeah.
Someone comes in the front and whispers to one of the people at one end of the boardroom table, and then it goes round the table. That is not what we're doing here. So I think it's those relationships with your team, with your stakeholders, your clients, your suppliers, and so on. That's important. And I suppose ultimately setting the best leadership example I can, but also staying true to who I am. So not trying to be something that I'm not, but being very aware of the influence I have, and in as much as the words that come out of my mouth or the
Right.
things I write are all going to be scrutinized, and lines are going to be read between, and it's,
Yes.
so I think I take that responsibility seriously, or very seriously.
Yeah. No, I see. And you mentioned something there that I think is really interesting because you were in a CEO role before the pandemic, and you've continued to be in one afterwards. And this whole sort of rise of remote and hybrid working, as you say, is, I imagine, has changed the dynamic of that quite a lot. How has it changed, do you think?
I mean, I have a very clear view, actually, that I think it's overtly more positive.
Okay.
I think that it makes our lives harder as leaders,
Right. Yeah.
because we have to find different ways of connecting with our team and with our clients and whoever else we need to connect with, which to all intents and purposes now is 90% as we are,
Yeah.
Teams and Zoom. Um, but I think this shaking off the model of command and control and forcing people back into offices is a positive thing, because I think it's not least from a gender perspective. Actually, I think it's leveled the playing field,
Right.
for particularly for the main caregiver, particularly if you have family, young family, or you have aging relatives. More often than not, it is the woman. That is just the case.
Yep.
But I think it's created some flexibility for people that perhaps wasn't there before, when they had to be present in an office. I know there's a big debate about how do you make sure that people are sharing ideas well? How do you make sure that younger people, or people earlier in their career, are being developed? What we found is we've asked the teams in Newcastle to be in the office once a week as a minimum. Mainly that's for a duty of care, more to just make sure we see them and that
Yes.
they're okay. But I think our younger team members, or the ones that earlier in their career, have self-selected to come into the office more often,
Yes.
because they appreciate the fact they can get together and actually collaborate. So I think that it's better overall for the workforce, but I put my hands up and say I have to consciously think about it all of the time, in terms of,
Yeah.
have I been present when I've been in the office? Have I been engaged? Have I made sure that people have seen me in some capacity or other on a regular enough basis that they know that I'm still connected to the business? So, but I I'm happy with that. I'd rather it was on me in some ways, and the rest of the leadership team, than this expectation to be present in an office.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's an interesting point that you make, because we did something very similar. We, here in Cardiff, we have a day a week that everyone comes in. And basically, we put that in place because there was a period of about 2 weeks where I came into the office probably 6 or 7 times over that 2 weeks. And for 4 of those times, I was the only person in. And on other days where I was dialing in, there was someone else who was the only person in the office. And I remember just thinking, well, we're missing the point of having the space here, and we're not really making the most of it. But similar to you, I let them pick the day. So I wanted it to be a Monday, but they weren't so keen on that. So so it's a Wednesday. Um, but they all come in much more than that, at least a couple of days a week, usually 3 days a week. And it's interesting. You see these businesses struggling to get people in 3 days a week, and obviously everyone's in different circumstances. But yeah, I think you're right. I think if you make it a choice, and then they see the benefit of people see the benefit of being together, they tend to opt into that a little bit more, unless there's a reason that they can't, and then that's fair enough, and that's a different conversation.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I also think that COVID did give us also an opportunity to be a lot more fluid. So we have
Yes.
a customer base that's across many time zones. So could as far as the West Coast in the US, and at times has been in Asia as well. So I always say this to the team, and I'm not sure it lands with everyone, but I always say you can work from anywhere at any time. Just make sure you don't let anyone down. So in other words,
Right.
don't miss a deadline. Don't. So you find people who have younger children, and perhaps through the summer they've had sports days. Like I've seen a few videos on our Slack channels around sports days, and you just go, actually, we've given them the freedom to choose to do that,
Yes.
as long as it doesn't impact the client or the team. Then, and I think that creates a more balanced approach to work,
Hmm.
because we spend most of our time at work. But if you get that chance to go, well, I'm just going to go watch that Christmas play, or I'm just going to go visit that relative who's in hospital, visiting time is 1 till 3 or whatever. I hope that also gives some commitment from us. And then I
Yeah.
think what you do get it back, because you just do.
No, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I have my opinion on this, but interested in yours. Do you think it's meant that you've had to become a better leader to
Oh,
manage in that
without
way?
without a doubt. It's much harder, right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
if you're in command and control, I'm going to have you in the office 8:30 to 5:30, and if you want to do anything and you're
Mm.
5 minutes late from lunch or whatever, somebody's going to breathe down my neck. That's actually sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it's actually easier for the people in charge,
Yeah,
because
for
it's
sure.
like it's not flexible. It just, this is how it is, and if you're not in those boundaries, then we know you're wrong. Like, essentially, it's that black and white.
Yes.
So you bang on. It's we've had to completely rethink the way we think about the team, our the messages we give to them subliminally about trust, because it doesn't matter what you say, does it? You have to act in that
Yeah, of
way.
course. Yeah.
um and watching them work through COVID, I think, proved to those people who might have been a cynic on this, that why would we never not trust our team? Like, they
Hmm.
literally went home and delivered an inordinate amount of work,
Yes.
and dealing with young children at home, the mental health pressures of some of them working in a one-bedroom flat with their partner. There was a heap of stuff that we just
Yeah.
hadn't anticipated. To turn around to them at the end of that and go, right, guys, I know you just nailed it, but we're going to bring you back in the office, because basically we're telling you we still don't trust you.
Yeah. And it's easier for me.
And yeah, bang on. It's easier for me because I can just see you all every day, and I know you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
exactly what I want you to. So
yeah.
yeah.
I think the relationship bit's interesting though, isn't it? Because I know one of the things that um, I've had to be really conscious of is that it's really easy for someone to sort of turn on being okay for a 45-minute Zoom, and to sort of, present like everything's fine. It's much more difficult to do that when you're sitting next to them
Yeah.
for a week, right? And so actually, not in terms of a control point of view, but in terms of sort of looking after people, that actually has become a little bit more difficult, I've found.
I think you're right. I think it's something that we do take really seriously. Um, but we have quite a lot of good. Well, there's a really good tool we use. We use a tool called Culture Amp for all of our sort
Oh,
of
okay, yeah, yeah.
performance management. And in that tool, at every one-to-one, there's this brilliant, it's called a check-in slider. So basically, it says things like how are you feeling about work, relationships, how are you feeling about your impact, how's your well-being.
Mm,
And actually, as people have got into the sort of the approach of that, their ability to be quite straight and honest with how they are has become really important. So those, not everyone does it. I do all my catch-ups weekly, but you get this brilliant story appearing because someone might have a really bad week and they'll knock their well-being down. Of course,
yes.
that is the first thing you look at and you go, right, what's going on? Like, how are you?
Yeah.
And then over time, you can see whether that was a one-off or whether we've got a longer term issue. So that's a great tool, but
Mm,
clearly you have to have a sense of openness and trust within the business for that to happen. But the other thing I think is the team are really good at letting the right person know if they think they've seen something.
right.
So it's not all laddering up to the line manager or the people head of people or whatever it is. Others will spot stuff and will say, which we are probably rightly or wrongly more reliant on now because of the remoteness.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, there's always going to be stuff you miss. We're
Yeah.
not, but you'd miss it in the office.
Well, that's true. Yeah, I guess, everything's so busy all the time, isn't it? That, yeah, unless you take that time to see it. But like you say, you've got to, I guess, empower the managers who spend more time with those
Mm.
people and train them and do all that kind of thing. Um, so I guess moving on from that sort of definition of what the role is, what do you think really great performance in that role looks like? Either for you or like people that you've seen that are brilliant at it, or whatever the context of that.
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is you have to deliver the plan.
Yep.
Because and I'm, sitting now private equity backed and looking at, how that cycle works. That is a big focus. Um, and you don't deliver it in a linear fashion and it goes up and down and we might go backwards and then forwards. So there's that, right?
Yes.
But I've been in a role like this in a much smaller business where I was never going to deliver the plan because it was
Mm,
pre-revenue and it was a very challenging environment. So I suppose if that's a given, I don't necessarily think it is 100% the definition of success, though. I
yeah.
think ultimately it comes down to have you built a great team around you? Have you got people you can speak to who are going to give you good counsel, regardless of whether they're above you, alongside you, or below you?
Yes.
How good are you at listening to people? Um, and I'm the first to put my hand up and go, I love to chat, and I've had to work really hard to make sure that I listen
Right.
properly and listen between the words, if you like, and hear what the person is saying. And I know myself that I will listen to somebody. I may not, it sounds ridiculous, but I may not get it straight away. And
Yeah.
then I go away and reflect and go, right. Um, I think that you have to be prepared to learn. You have to be prepared to
Yes.
learn from your own mistakes and also listening to the people. And I think I've become better, loads better, at asking for feedback and receiving it.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know whether that's, I mean, I've had various bits of leadership training through my life, if you like. So I did Vistage for 5 years, which was
Oh, okay.
phenomenal. Like,
Yeah.
I loved it. But more recently, because our chair, Paul, is such a massive advocate, we've rolled out the Living Leader program
Hmm.
we've started to roll it out across the business. And I haven't completed yet, but I've just started my pilot to be certified to train. And in preparing for that, it's a huge amount of work, has got me really, really deeply embedded into the material.
Right.
And there, because if you want to train it, you really have to understand it at a different level. And then delivering that training, which I did a few weeks ago for the first time, I think that it's almost a philosophy of how we operate both at work and at home.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and I do take that side of it really seriously, although I will put my hand up and say I'm nowhere near perfect. Like I still fall into the same traps and I still make the same mistakes, but I just have much better awareness.
Right.
Um, but again, I think this is about developing other people and building super relationships and having a clear strategic direction.
Yes.
And even when things go wrong, you'll be glad I just stopped myself swearing then. Even when
You can swear if you want, it's
okay,
fine.
will you just have to mark this as explicit at the end of it?
Yeah,
That has
yeah,
happened to me before. So when things go wrong, it's how what happens.
Yeah.
Do we all lose our heads? Do all those really awful characteristics suddenly re-emerge? Just do I suddenly turn into this awful dictator? I mean, sometimes obviously you have to be a bit more tell, but do we stay calm? Do we actually work together to try and push forward? And I think that's really important. And particularly over the last, probably 4 years through COVID, and the falling out of that, and how hard the pharma industry has been hit by coming out of COVID. We've had to dig in and be resilient and work out what the next step is. And I think for me, that's really that's success.
Yes.
That transcends the plan in some ways, because things work and they don't.
No, absolutely. And I think this is it. It's kind of different if you're running a big public company, right? And
Sure,
then the
of course.
market decides what is successful and what's not. And,
Sure.
you have some influence, but I guess it's
It's true.
limited. In a smaller business, even where you have sort of backers and investors and a board and that kind of stuff, yes, delivering the numbers is critical. But I think you've got to, as you've just done, you've got to sort of define what success is, right? Because delivering the number is just the result. It's not the sort of
No.
the method. It's not the thing that gets you. It's the score that tells you if what you're doing is working.
Yeah.
But there are other criteria for success, right? And I think in a company, I don't know about sort of the makeup of your clients and things like that, but in a company of your size, if you lost a couple of accounts, major accounts, for reasons that were not anything to do with what you'd done, that's going to have an impact on the numbers, isn't it? And
Massive, yeah.
that doesn't mean it's been unsuccessful. It's just, what are we doing? As you say, what are we doing in response to that? So I think, yeah, I struggled with that for a long time, actually, because I'd been a sales director for years and years and years and years before I started this business. And so you always had your number. And
Yeah.
that was kind of, yes, there was other stuff, but that was really what it was about when you're a sales director, is, are you delivering that number? And suddenly there was no one to tell me what that number was. And it wasn't the only thing that was important either. So yeah, I think it's an interesting situation to find yourself in. I liked what you said about listening. It's one of the more challenging parts, I think, in that, I don't know about you, but I always find I've got so much on my mind that actually, even for a few minutes, just stopping, being present and really engaging without something else running through your head, or without you thinking about, right, I've got to be here in 10 minutes, or actually I've got to reply to that email, or this kind of stuff, can be really difficult, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's I mean, I probably need things stuck all over the wall in my office that just say,
Yeah,
remember to listen. I mean, it's ridiculous, really, isn't it?
yeah.
But you're right. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in this particular role, or in a very senior role in a business, is that you are spinning a lot of plates, and
Mm,
you have to work out the best way to manage your own workload and also be present when people need you to be present.
yes.
And I think, you know, again, through this living leader training, because I think Vistage had a big impact on me. There were lots of really amazing things that came out of that for me. But this living leader training has taken it to another level, in terms of, it's the whole premise is, here's a heap of models, and actually if you join them all together, by you take as an individual responsibility for everything, and you have 100% choice in terms
Yeah.
of what you do. If you remember that, then every day I have choices to make. And so I have awareness now that sometimes the choice I need to make is to ensure I'm 100% present, or it is
Right.
to be more directing, or there's just all of this stuff that, when you remind yourself, it's a bit like that thing I read to you before about, create your thinking creates your reality.
Yes.
If I think negatively all the time, then I'm not that great an actress. People are going to know there's something going on, however much I try and put on the veneer. Equally, if I think positively and optimistically, then look what happened on Wednesday night. We got into the final of the Euros. I'm not saying that was me, but there is that. You've got to have that belief, I suppose. So yeah, listening's a hard one for
Mm,
a CEO, I think.
yes. Um, you've mentioned Vistage a couple of times, so I'd be interested to hear more about that. So, from what I understand, it's kind of a mentoring, coaching program, but with people with a lot of experience doing the sort of the mentoring. Is that right?
So the way it worked for me, and I think the sort of more standard model is I joined Vistage and I joined a group of another maybe 9 people. I can't remember how many people were in my group. So you're put into a group of other people at a similar level as you,
Okay.
but in organizations that are not in competition with you, because obviously
Yeah.
that wouldn't work. And the idea of it is you have one day a month where you go out of your business and you have time together. Um, and then I think, say, three times out of four, they bring in an external speaker in the morning. And in my experience, the speakers were just phenomenal
Right.
because I think I have always had, rightly or wrongly, a bit of a, I don't know, a belief about the academic side of business, in
Mm,
that, you go and do something academic that's business related. And I go, well, how does that work? Because actually, have the people who are actually training this stuff ever done it? Because I'm definitely a person who learns on the job.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
and whereas Vistage people would come and they would have done business, or they would have, worked with business for years and years and years. So there was this real credibility for me personally about what was said. And as with all these things, you might only take one or two things away from every session because there's so
Mm,
much content. But some of that has been transformational for me. I probably couldn't tell you what it was because I suspect it was small things.
right.
Like a
Okay.
really easy example, I love this example, is there's this guy called Marcus Childs, and I can't remember what his session was about, but he was talking a lot about how we use a lot of negative words to convey a positive.
Okay.
Things like, we say, if I said to you, how are you doing? And you go, what is it, not bad.
Not bad. Yeah.
You say thank you, someone says no problem. And now,
Uh-huh.
because of that, I never use those words
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's jars with me now when I hear it. I'm like, whoa, you're saying
Yeah.
something really negative. You don't realize you are. So it's just those small things that have just permeated my
Mm,
thinking, which I loved about Vistage. It was a long time ago now. I think I finished doing it nearly 10 years ago.
yeah.
But
Okay.
but
So it's
it's,
kind of expert speakers, like a group coaching type
yeah,
thing, peer groups and that kind of stuff.
I'm being held to account because
Yeah.
I had a great guy in my group who'd be like, if someone said anything, he'd be like, really? Really? That's just an excuse. It was that kind of, it was great, really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Excellent. Um, and then you talked about this Living Leader program as well. So is that something that you're developing for the people in, like the leaders in your business? Is that right?
So the Living Leader program is a program. It's something run by an external
Oh, okay.
company
Right.
called the Living Leader. But I think early last year, we put 16 people through their personal leadership program. So we brought an external a trainer in and we did it, and it was amazing. And and I think that there's that we could have just continued to roll out Living Leader via that route across the business. But one, it's hugely expensive, but also there's a huge amount of credibility, I suppose, in some of the key senior people in our business being trained to train it,
Yes.
because you're almost saying, actually, we're embracing this, we're taking this on board and going, this is how we want to run this business, and now we're going to train everybody. So it's Paul again who encouraged us. It was myself and our head of people to do the sort of certified training program. So we started that in April, finished it in May, and then I think was it last week? Last week I did my first 2 days of my pilot, where you deliver the training to 8 people, live people, and your assessors sit in the back of the room. And luckily we have an amazing assessor who's just so like engaged and warm. You never feel that you're being scrutinized, and it was phenomenal for me. I mean, it's really hard work.
Right.
My husband's a teacher, and I said to him, now I know what it feels like to be like
Yeah.
standing at the front of a classroom from 9 in the morning till 5 at night, whatever. But it was so good, and I think I have my third day with them in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Um, so they do a 2 day quite intensive first bit, and then they give everyone 3 weeks, and then we come back and we review. So the beauty of doing it internally, I think, is that now more and more people go through it, there's more and more collective accountability for,
Right.
this is how we're actually going to lead, and helping people realize that leadership is not at the higher echelons of the business. It doesn't just
Mm,
sit
mm,
at
mm.
board and senior leadership team. It sits within everybody. So it's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
And I think taking the time to really, when the pressure's not on in a situation, to really think about, well, what are our principles about
Mm.
how we're going to lead this business and that kind of thing. I think that's important, right? Because there's lots of different ways you could tackle issues and challenges and that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. But I
Yeah.
think the beauty of all of this is it's lots of models that are quite old in some cases,
Right.
but haven't changed. Nothing's
No.
changed particularly because human beings haven't really
No.
changed in terms of
Exactly.
the way we're motivated and all that kind of thing. But they're just hung together in this with this brilliant narrative of responsibility and choice.
Yeah. Okay.
And because so often what we hear is from people, that's not my job, or that was somebody else's decision, or whatever. And we had this discussion as a group, and I said, imagine people complain about communication all the time, like it's the age old, it's not good enough. And I sit here going, oh my goodness, have I not done something right? But when
Yeah.
you look at it through another lens and go, if every one of us committed to communicating to the best of our ability, we probably wouldn't have a communication problem.
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
So, I think it's just straightforward stuff like that, which we
Mm,
we don't ever really challenge. We just assume. So yeah,
yeah.
let's see what happens. We've got the rest of the business to get through it probably in the next 6 months or so. But
No, it's interesting. I think, yeah, going and teaching that stuff really, it allows you to really bring it into yourself, doesn't it? And really, really embed it. And you said that, your general style is you learn on the job as much as anything else. So I mean, we've talked about leadership. We've talked about kind of the definition of the role and what great performance looks like and all that kind of thing. Talked about execution and delivery. If you look back at your development as a CEO and kind of the things that have been most important to that, some of it we might have talked about already, but
mm,
are there sort of key lessons that you've learned that have been particularly important to you, do you think?
without a doubt. Um, um, it's really hard actually to think about it, because I could say I never had an ambition when I was, I don't know, coming out of my postdoc, which is essentially when I finished my education,
Right.
that I wanted to be a CEO. Like that was the
Yeah.
last thing on my mind, because at that point I then started to train as an acupuncturist. So I was going to
Oh,
be,
okay.
yeah, I was like ready to be sort of holistic and into health and all that kind of thing. Then had children, which
Mm,
slightly changes the focus because you need to earn a living. And
yes.
I think I feel anyway, a lot of my career progression has been serendipitous. Now, it's not just that, clearly, because you've got to have some kind of capability and aptitude for
Yeah.
for the things that you're doing. But I never had a grand plan. Um, I think I've ended up working with and for people who've been brilliant and great
Okay.
and encouraging and given me opportunity, allowed me to challenge myself. And I think that I've just been a person who's been prepared to have a go, and I'm going to try that and let's see if I can do it. Ultimately, though, pre-remarketing, when I was at my previous company, there clearly is a drive in me to want to be in control of my own destiny. Now,
Hmm.
one way to do that is start your own business. Well, I am not an entrepreneur. I think that's a different set of skills,
Right.
and I'm in absolute awe of anyone who does it. Um, but I am definitely somebody who the only way to have control of my own destiny was probably get nearer the top. Um,
Mm-mm.
and I don't think I recognized that in myself probably until later, when you go, actually, why? If someone said to me, what made you want to be a CEO? I'm like, I'm not sure it was the job title at all. It was probably
Yes.
just this desire to have some bigger influence. Um, and I think that I've worked with great people and I've worked with not so great people. And I think the lessons you learn from the people who aren't quite so good are better.
Right. Okay.
So, so when things have not been so great, you realize that those are the things you would never want to do, you would choose not to do. And that is what probably forms you. Whereas I suppose if you see somebody, well, I would use an example because it's happened to me earlier in my career, where you're consistently essentially being bullied at
Mm,
work, because it can happen.
mm.
um, you can either choose to do the same, or you can choose to say, I'm never doing that, and I'm never
Right.
doing it to
Yes.
anyone.
Yeah.
I've had examples where I've been told, I'm going to give you this promotion, we're going to give you this pay rise. I'm like, great. And then I get the promotion and not the pay rise. And I always vowed I
Okay.
would never commit to giving anyone any more money unless it was nailed on. Like I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
even do it to try and dangle the carrot, because it is so demotivating. So I think there's those silly examples, I
Mm,
suppose. But ultimately, as I've become more I guess, comfortable in my own skin, what is really important to me is that I can be who I am, as much as you have to in a board meeting. There's perhaps a different way of handling things versus, if you were with a client.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I want to know that this is who I am when I'm at work, because how much effort would that be if I have to play a role and all that energy that you have to use? And then at home, I'm a completely different person. Although my husband would say to me that I am, because he always says to me, why can't you worry about our financial situation as much as you worry about marketing's? And I'm like, because I do it every day, Ian, and you can, so I think but I think that's important. And
Yes.
I guess with confidence, you realize that's okay as well. And then you add in the female element, which you can't ignore. I worked in the pharma industry for nearly 20 years. I mean, I
Yeah.
still am, but agencies are generally more female heavy.
Yes.
And I had to be able to navigate that. And it never really bothered me until about this 2012, so maybe 12 years ago, when I went to some event in London, which was pharma and biotech, and I walked out into this sort of outside space, and all I could see was men in suits,
Right.
and there were a few women.
Hmm.
And at the time, I just went, "Wow, I don't think I'd quite appreciated," because I was in clinical research, and actually in clinical research, where I was in data management, that was quite female heavy, and
Yes. Yeah.
so was CRA work, so the
Hmm.
monitoring work was a lot of women. But at the leadership level, clearly it was, so something was happening up the way on the way up, which we can talk about at length
Yeah.
on another day. But I think that I feel more confident to go, this is who I am. My hair is actually pink and purple,
Hmm.
and take it or leave it, because I know I can do my job, and that's quite liberating.
Yes.
But I don't think that's something that came when I was 40. Like, it's come later.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult, right, to go and take that stance and do things in your own way when you don't see anyone else doing it. Like you say, when you turn around and everybody looks the same,
Yeah.
and sort of you, as much as you can consciously think, well, that doesn't matter, I can still do it, I'm good at my job, as you said, in the back of your mind, subconsciously, it's going, yeah, yeah, but they don't look like you don't look like them. It's
Mm,
not, that's not perhaps the place for you to be. And I think it's still, there are some strides being made around sort of female leadership teams and investment
mm,
into female-led companies and things like that. But the needle's moved very slightly, right? It's not moved a huge amount. And I don't know if this is still true, but there was a stat I saw a few years ago that in the S&P 500 there were more CEOs called David than there were female CEOs. Uh, and it's that kind of thing. It's like, there is a lot of evidence to say that actually, and again, this is generalizing and stereotyping to an extent, but a lot of feminine qualities or qualities you just particularly associate
mm,
or traditionally associate with women are actually really effective in that top level leadership role, in terms of prioritization and compassion and
mm,
emotional intelligence and that kind of
mm.
thing. Um, was there anyone that you saw that sort of helped you to see yourself in that role, or was it just you doing it yourself? How did you sort of navigate that?
I mean, I met some incredible women and female
Mm,
leaders up through my career, but, and this is a big but now, there were also equally some female leaders who I would not want to have been,
right.
like, modeling. And there were just as many, and that was the time probably where women felt the only way to make it at the top was to act like a man.
Okay.
Um, I think though I had, and I'm really proud of this actually. I have had great male support as well.
Mm,
So I've had people around me who've been really, really encouraging of me regardless. So I haven't looked for the female role model. I just thought actually this person is a role model, and therefore this is a really great direction of travel. Um, that's I know that's not the same for everyone, and
yeah.
it does depend on, it depends on so many variables, doesn't it? Where are you working, what size of the business, who are the people you choose to engage with? There's just so much that will prevent a woman from progressing. I think the only time I've ever felt imposter syndrome from a gender point of view was when I was trying to raise money.
Okay.
Not this run with North Edge at all, but pre that, so my previous job, trying to raise money. It was more VC funding, and I would go in front of a panel of men, and then we wouldn't be successful. And after a while, you go, "Is this because I'm a woman?"
Mm,
And that's really hard because
mm,
in my head, I'm like, I'm just as able. I just approach things a bit differently. And I don't know. Genuinely, while we're talking, I'm just thinking, I wonder if I'm just rebellious. And actually, what I needed was to be able to come to this business and basically challenge people's thinking by,
right.
for example, dyeing my hair pink. Because I know
Yeah.
for a fact that sometimes I will, for the first time I meet someone, they'll go, okay, uh, yeah, okay, so you work for an agency, so I'll forgive you for this, but
Right.
do you have the credibility and, you know, to be able to handle a conversation with me? And then I know that when I open my mouth, within whatever a few minutes, that whole assumption has gone. But I don't
Yes.
know whether part of me is going, I'm going to challenge your thinking now because I'm properly in front of you going, I look
Yeah.
different. So yeah, I mean it's a journey, and I know
Mm,
I hear horror stories and from female colleagues, and I think also one of the big things that I've got a lot more on board it with, which is probably through personal experience as well, is the fact that women go through so much in addition to just their working life.
yes.
They are the ones that struggle with fertility. They are the ones, I mean, men do too, but the woman is the one that has to get pregnant. You know, they have pregnancy, they then have other challenges with hormones through their lives. So you know, I know this might sound very dramatic, but actually the deck is stacked against us for lots
Mm,
of reasons. And so a big part of, I think, my role as a CEO is to also be really open about my own experiences, and so that others can also talk about it and know that that's okay, and we can get around it or through it or past it.
yes.
Um, and that's what we probably don't have enough of. Like we don't have enough of the acknowledgement that there are challenges. And I know there are challenges for men as well. So this is not about
No,
them and
no.
us at all. This is very much, there are a lot of things a woman has to tackle that a man doesn't because of our biology. So, and we have to, in a working environment, be able to accommodate that.
And do you think, and you may not, um, do you think because it is more challenging that perhaps that dissuades women from talking about those challenges
Mm.
because they don't want to draw attention to things that they find challenging?
But also, you know, is it going to be a sign of weakness? And if it, you
Right.
know, it's, we can't, I mean, maybe this is a brave thing to say. I don't really think we can have equality, but we can have equity.
Mm,
And they're quite subtly different. Well, though they're not subtly different at all. They are very different. But I think we've always pushed equality. We need to be the same. No, we're not the same.
yes.
We need to understand from all levels of difference what is needed by that individual, that group, that will support them to be successful. And I think I've recognized that late. I know I've always been a
Yeah.
late developer. But I've recognized it late and now going, right, actually this is really important and we need to make sure that the that it's equitable for everyone.
Right. Yeah, and I think I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and it was the first time I'd ever really thought about it like this, and it really struck me that if you think about it from a leadership point of view, if we accept, as I think generally people do, that everybody's different, well, then everybody needs different leaders
Mhm.
and different types of leaders. And so, actually, wouldn't it be really beneficial to make this much more open and much more
Mm,
diverse and to not have a sort of archetype of this is what leadership is? And because that's what it is, yeah, and that's fine for that group of people and people who connect with that. But if everybody's different, then surely we need to see that reflected
yeah.
in leadership.
But I also think that what we have to do is probably the same,
Yeah,
but how we do it
yeah,
is then unique to us as individuals in leadership positions, but it also requires of us an incredible amount of adaptability and openness and appreciation of the fact that even within our business, I mean, this is well, actually, I'll use an example of a previous business. So I'm chatty and, you know, I like to talk, I like to think out loud. So I will just
hmm
talk things through. And I had a guy I worked with who was software development background, went into quality assurance, and I'd have meetings with him, and you could just see him glazing over in these
right,
meetings because I was like chewing the cud. And he's like, get to the point. That's a really simple example where I recognized that and went, right, well, when I'm speaking to this individual, I can't go off on one. I need to be just,
yes,
where's my list? Let's be really clear about what we're talking about and then move on. So And that's hard for me because I love a good chat, but that wasn't working for him. And I think we forget sometimes this isn't actually about us, is it? It's about the other people. It's about the people that we lead and or influence, whatever it is. So
No, that's a good point. Yeah, because there's that balance, isn't there, between authenticity that you were talking about earlier, and then adapting to different people and different styles, and those two things aren't necessarily opposite.
no, not at all.
Yeah, interesting. All right, Emma, I could dive into all of this. I think we're starting to run out of time, unfortunately. So I've got one last question for you. You used the word journey a few minutes ago, and I think that's a really appropriate word for sort of being a CEO, because it's always a journey, right? And you never at the end of it, you've never accomplished it. And actually, sort of one of my beliefs is that if you're doing that job really well, you're always going to be moving into territory that you've never quite been in before, because you're making progress and you're moving forward, right? So I was interested on the journey that you're on. What's one important thing that you're still working on?
Just one. I can give you, well, I'll give you one sort of about me and one about the job I'm in now. So I
Okay.
guess from a job perspective, I've never done PE before. We're on a cycle now, a PE cycle, and every day is a new day of learning and learning about expectations of all the key stakeholders and the journey the business is on that I'm, I suppose, ultimately responsible for. So I think, and that's exciting and I love it. And I really hope that I have many, many more years of being really excited about the fact that
Yeah.
I don't really know something, because actually that's what it's like. Sometimes I go, I don't, what? We're going to do this. I'm like, okay, can someone tell me where we start? That would be great. And I'll figure out the rest.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
so there's that. And personally, I suppose there's this constant drive for me that leadership is a practice. In other words,
yeah.
you have to practice it all of the time.
Mm.
And you can't, well, I can't sit here and go, I'm a leader. I'm a leader in development. I'm a leader in progress. I know I have responsibilities, but as a human being, I do think deeply about my influence on others, as I said earlier, my communication, how it might be interpreted, how I'm seen, what my body language is saying to people, all of this stuff, all of these things, the verbal and non-verbal, which is so important,
Yes.
particularly when you're leading through change, which this business seems to be going through change every 5 minutes. But I think that's actually the world we're in now.
I think
Um,
so, yeah.
but I feel very conscious that I have to continue to be almost that rock. And I don't mean that in a dramatic, it's all about me way, but I just feel very personally responsible for being
Mm.
consistent and clear and straight and honest with people. And that is always a work in progress, because you are constantly hit up against things where you go, what's the right thing to do versus how scared am I?
Yeah.
And there's the conflict. So I think that probably encompasses everything in terms of a work in progress.
Yeah, that makes sense. As I say, look, there's loads of this that I'd love to talk more about, but I think we've come up to time. So, uh, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Tom, and hopefully as your first guest, it's worth it.
I think 100%. Thanks so much,
I
Emma.
appreciate that. All right.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of CEO Sessions. If you got a kick out of it, share it with someone else who you think will enjoy it, and hit like and subscribe so you can get the newest ones when they come out. And if you want to see more of me, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or YouTube, or especially LinkedIn. See you soon.